Hey guys, my name is MC and welcome back to another Soul Knight video. Well, that sounded like a Minecraft intro, but today we're going to be redoing my past video on all the buffs, which is ranking all the buffs, making a tier list out of them. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into it with this updated Soul Knight buffs tier list. Quick disclaimer before the video starts, this video is literally based on my own opinions. There's been so much heated conversations in the Soul Knight Discord servers and they do not agree with my opinions whatsoever. And because I want to keep this video as short as possible, I will be going over the buffs in a very swift manner. So if I missed everything, you just, put them in the comment section down below. So grab some popcorn, enjoy the freaking video. Also, by the time I'm recording this, there is a bug that's been living in my air ventilation chamber for a month, and it keeps, making noises, so if you hear that, please ignore it. Bye. Be honest. How many of you guys were thinking about the more gem buff for last place, since it's the only buff that provides no benefits in game? But max mana is a little more useless in my opinion. I haven't seen a single player that depletes their mana constantly, even in normal runs where you're not holding down the Gatling gun. Even when you are that type of player that just wants to pew pew all day every day, having 100 extra mana that is not rechargeable but simply increases the max amount is literally not helpful. If you need extra mana, consider getting mana on kill or even the sale buff for more chances to buy mana potions in the shop. You'll be better off with them. Despite being one of the newer buffs being released, Energy Shield sucks big ass. The thing I'm going to address here is that active buffs are better than passive buffs in most cases. In a game where you're actively avoiding damage, having a small kickback when you do doesn't seem like a great choice to have. This buff is borderline as useless as max mana, but unlike max mana, this ability does have effects on most players. I'm gonna stop you before you shit in the comment section down below about how you main Gatling gun and these two buffs are crucial. Learn how to wisely use your mana, instead of drooling over your tablet screen when it runs out. More gems is the only buff that provides no benefits to the current game you're playing. No, the current game. For a new player that doesn't have all the characters maxed out, this buff can provide some sweet little bonuses to your progression because even if you had blue shield, you'll probably still die at the last boss anyways. This long-term boost quickly depletes after you max out a character and is seeking to actually beat the game. But it could be useful in like 7.5 situations. As I said, buffs that activate when you get hurt is not good. Please do not use them. And this buff avoids that and turns to a more offensive route. Still, mana isn't a concern for most people, and this certainly doesn't help much in game since 2 mana is generally a lot lower than the mana required to kill an enemy. It's still miles better than Energy Shield and deserves a higher than its weaker brother. People in the Discord server says this ability is really good for high damaging weapons because you get a small kickback after you kill an enemy and the energy cost will usually be really low, and I do see how that works. But as I said, mana is not uncommon in this game. You just pick up the things on the ground and you will never run out of mana, so I don't see this ability ever being really useful. This buff shines the brightest being Priest's passive, since the abilities benefit from it a lot. In other scenarios, it has impact, just not very great. Many times you'd be wasting the healing, and many times you'd not be able to find a health bot. This buff is way too dependent on RNG and other undecisive factors that is just not worth going for at all, unless you're using Priest. In that case, smash the fucking like button if you main Priest and do not like to play with others. This buff is literally the most situational and the most gimmicky on this list. Shield Replenish actually sucks big ass again. Regaining full shield is nice, but in most situations it's not worth trading with weaker shield. Like, what the heck, man? Solo Knight characters don't have 3-digit shield numbers. 1 more damage on your shield is critical, and 15 seconds of cooldown cannot make up for it. Too long to read, this buff is 90% curses and 10% blessings. The only place I can see it being useful is basically if you're playing Paladin, and it works to a certain degree. But when I was playing Knight with this ability, shit doesn't even work. I didn't even realize. I was just realizing I was taking more damage, but I didn't even realize it was replenishing it. And it just did not feel great. Did not feel great. I'm freaking dyslexic. Anyways, let's move on to the next buff. Okay, we're finally out of the F tier, the poop tier, the tier where nobody chooses anything and it's all bad. So we're moving on to tier D, which they could be honestly decently useful when, you know, you had the right characters for it. So last place in tier D, we have freaking melee range. This buff sounds pretty okay on paper until you get to see how minuscule the buffs actually are. The attack area increases are barely noticeable and end up being not that big of a help. If your original choice for this buff is to provide better protection with melee weapons, going for faster speed is generally the better choice. Again, buffs that take effect when you're damaged is bad, is really bad. It doesn't matter if you get chances to crit opponents, it's just never worth it to sacrifice your health for it. Every time your shield depletes, you need to be seeking cover, and being able to crit when you're supposed to be hiding is just not a good idea. The crit chance bonus is actually not bad, so it's not further down the list, but you know, you shouldn't ever be trading your health for it. That's why, you know, damage crit can just stay in number 31st on the list, but this stuff is just not really that good. You know, I never expected a shield buff to be this low, but ice shields are such a blessing and a curse. One thing you may not know is that you are actually invincible when you're frozen in ice, and this can sometimes aid you in surviving threatening boss attacks. Being able to freeze enemies longer is only useful against bosses and thick mobs, making it a bit situational. And it is here in the video that I tell you that situational buffs are so much worse than unsituational buffs or just overall buffs. An ice shield is basically the worst shield and most situational shield in the shield family. And also when bosses go enraged or go into their second form, whatever you want to call it, they actually take reduced freezing, and this thing doesn't actually add a lot in the freezing, so I don't know why you want to choose it. You can't even freeze trap enemies, so you know, go for other things. Combo buff is very niche, like so niche that I think this buff is probably the nichest, I don't know if that word exists. This is probably the nichest ability in game, since only a small amount of weapons can combo hit. After some changes to it, many abilities that stack can also benefit from it, making this ability pretty useful sometimes, and still very obsolete many other times. Making weapon combos more can also sometimes mess up your cycles. I cannot handle Bloodblade's 5 swings because it messes up my movement, but this isn't a problem for more casual players. I have Bloodblade like basically stamped into my muscle memory, so when it swings 5 times instead of 3, it makes my movement jitter like crazy, so I hate it. But in most cases, it saves mana and deals more damage, you get what I mean.
Another day, another migraine.
Okay, this single-handedly is probably the most controversial pick ever in my tier list. I am putting Shield Blast in 28th spot. Despite this ability being favored by the community, I do not like it. I have to put this low on the list because of these reasons. Firstly, Shield Blast is kind of redundant due to iframes after each hit. You can survive through thinner bullet clouds without this ability fine and dandily. Second, the blast radius is actually not that big. Some open rooms in Badass have enemies firing rooms full of bullets at you, and I find that Shield Blast cannot counter it very well, and you'd still get hit many times. This is another ability that just sounds good on paper, but it really isn't practical in my opinion. I'm gonna stop you in your tracks. I know you're typing an angry comment saying that this ability is very, very good and it is a top pick, but this is my opinion. I think this thing is not very good. And plus, there are many more options you can use for clearing bullet clouds, you know, like the elf statue, or basically anything else like a melee weapon. So I don't think this ability is too useful. Again, this is a passive buff, it's pretty niche, so, you know, I think the low place for it is justified. On 27th is Melee Bounce. I used to put Melee Bounce a little lower. It used to be completely garbage. Having the bullets reflected to be the same color as enemy ones is such a recipe for disaster, but after the change, it has somewhat become better. Still, the practicality of this buff is very debatable, since most of the times you are just using melee to protect yourself, clearing bullets is enough. This buff is mega fun though, you really get Skyward's lightsaber vibes, that's all I can say about it. Triple slots is just purely for fun. It has 2 practical uses, which is to carry floating weapons and to gold border more weapons in completionist runs. Other times, I find it to be annoying since you can't switch weapons easily and it makes weapon juggling feel like hell. You don't need 3 weapons in the dungeon. 1 main and 1 melee is far beyond enough. And the only time I can, justify this ability is when you need a side pistol to conserve on mana. Then this buff might actually be pretty useful. So, this is not really good. Okay, situational buff, staff buff. Not much to say. If you like staves, or if you're using good staves, pick it. Otherwise, stay the fuck off. Another buff over-glorified by the community. Thickened Laser provides sizable buffs to laser shockwaves and railgun blasts, and shockwaves like, the hammer shockwaves. I don't know, this is peak game design and I cannot handle it. It can be very decent at times, still too situational to be higher on this list, and the buffs are not really that great. 1 more damage is not really that great, and laser weapons and shockwave things don't actually miss, so kinda useless. I don't think there's anybody that talks about this buff. Double statue is just solid. It's a solid choice if you have a good statue effect that is synced with your ability. Even if you don't have it, it's still a decent enough choice since you encounter statues very often in game, and having double effects is, overall pretty useful. The only place where I do not recommend anybody use it is for long ability, characters. For example, basically, I can say Knight, for example, because most statue buffs don't sync with it, and you're gonna get very little out of this buff. So please don't choose it when you have a long CD character. For the situational buff, although elemental weapons are everywhere, personally think that elemental weapons are fine just as they are without double damage, but it can be helpful for specific loadouts like Ice Blade or even Lightning Sword. I think that's what it's called, I don't even fucking know. You can't really go wrong with this, but you can't really go right with this. Alright, moving on to the C tiers, guys. Again, a super controversial pick on my tier list. In 21st, we've got Sail. Sail buff is more useful than you think. This buff in normal modes means a better selection of weapons that you can afford, and more chances to do things such as heal, buying mercenaries, and fucking throwing coins in the freaking wishing well. This buff is quite useless in badass mode, since you never run out of coins in that mode, but it's decently helpful. Little bonus, it can also act as a more gems alternative because it can be utilized in game. Pet buff is such a underrated buff, and I do get why. Pets and mercenaries aren't good in Soul Knight, and the buffs are pretty unnecessary, but after the professional Soul Knight players lectured me, I think it's pretty useful. The main places where you'll be using it is in Banner or BANWR, Badass No Weapon runs, and other challenge runs. After spending some time, I find this buff as a pretty sizable buff on pets that can save you in time. I rate them. The number of weapons that gets buffed by this guy is far beyond what you would expect. It's a spread and damage buff for some of the most enjoyable weapons in the game, and is required for crazy loadouts and other things. This makes Shoddy buff better than laser and staff buffs. And this is also a good buff for one of my favorite weapons in the game, the laser shotgun. So if that's your favorite weapon in the game, please fucking subscribe. Charge buff. This buff is interchangeable with shotgun on this list. It really all comes down to preference, since these two buffs still isn't the most well-rounded. If you prefer shotgun type weapons, go with Shoddy. If you prefer bows, railguns, and axes, please take charge. That is literally all I have to say about this buff. It is B tier time. B tier means that this buff is actually pretty decent most of the time, so you won't be going wrong with these. In 17th place, we've got Fire Rate buff. Stop typing hate comments. I know you're doing it right now. I know you literally are doing it right now. The reason I put Fire Rate up here despite the measly 8% of an increase is because it's universal. This buff applies to every weapon, charge or no charge, melee or throwables. Most of the time, you are better off going with a small kick for everybody than a big kick for some type of weapons. So please, set down your biases for weapon genres and consider this buff. Also, this buff is a passive for Berserker, and Berserker is my favorite character, so, it gets bonus points for that. Potion crates are better than you think. Logo rooms aren't that rare and boxes are stacked in the dungeon. In normal modes, it's a great alternative to vampirism, though it still isn't as good as it in Badass. Still a solid option. If you have this buff, I would actually recommend Potion Effectiveness if you're the clumsiest fucking person ever and can't get enough healing. Also, you can save the potions on the ground, making this ability quite good in dire situations. I don't have much experience with this buff, but I can see it being very good and badass, where enemies are clumped together and explosions become a holy messiah of this game. In other situations, it's not completely useless and can provide at least some damage output. Solid choice. Also, the enemies explode instantly after they die, although I would have wanted for the enemy to bounce around and then explode, but you know, I can see why they designed it like that, so, you know. Crit speed! Again, defensive abilities are good. With how much you crit with assault rifle type weapons, this buff is literally for every character. You're basically always sped up, and if you're engaging with an enemy, you can see this buff as a permanent speed increase, which is always nice to have. It is kinda outshadowed by another ability that we will talk about in a short while. Please stay tuned. In A tier, we are now in A tier. That means these buffs are seriously good, and I do recommend them, you know, even sometimes over S tier buffs, because they are very good. 13th on A, we've got Spike Shield, one of the more important shields in badass runs. It's just barely able to squeeze into A tier, but it's still far less useful than any other shield family buffs, aside from the fucking Ice Shield and Shield Blast. Fuck these guys. Traps and charge type enemies attacks are pretty deadly, so having this buff can aid you well in safer runs. And you know, because cactuses are actually pretty common, so this buff will likely be a nice passive buff, you know, for badass runs if you want to collect plants and stuff. And I hate the fucking Christmas tree. That charge attack is literally undodgeable. I do not see how people like don't have trouble with Christmas tree, and it is my least favorite 1-5 boss, aside from the fucking monkey. So I think this buff is pretty good, and you won't be going wrong with this. On 12th place, we have Bullet Bounce, interchangeable with the next buff. This buff provides a bit of forgiveness if you miss your shot, and can help massive spread weapons become more effective. After the buffs, it now applies to bows and throwables, catapulting this ability further up the list. Critting is very common in this game, which is kind of weird. So having weapons pierce upon crit is also very good to have. This buff pairs up with snipers, bows, shotguns, even assault rifles extremely well, and it has some pretty insane effects on bursting type weapons like bouncing weapons. Overall, a nice buff, shines pretty well with rogue. Also, you can pair crit pierce and bullet bounce for maximum destruction. A bullet can like pierce up to 4 times, and I think it's pretty funny. In 10th place, we have shorter CD or shorter cooldown. I don't think I have to do much explaining. Shorter CD literally takes 50% off of the cooldown of your abilities. Rogue's insane with it, Assassin's insane with it, others aren't as much so, but it still gains a massive survivability increase and damage buffs. Super good buff to always have. The only one I can think of who doesn't need this is Elf with her first, or Druid with his first, because these two abilities literally don't need charging, but it's still debatable. Anyways, I think this ability like pairs up super well with low CD buffs. Like, Jesus Christ, have you ever experienced low CD rogue with mentor buff with 50% less CD? That roll is literally permanent. After you roll, you can roll again. It's like so insane. So please try it. Now we're into the S tier. These abilities are so good, and they are good for every single character. There's no exceptions. First, in S tier, we've got health plus 4. As covered in the last rankings videos, this buff is good. It helps both in survivability and in confidence boosts, which I think is another gigantic factor in this game, making you perform a lot better under stressful situations. It's an ability that's equal to everybody who chooses it, plus it's 4 health. Who wouldn't want that? Like, duh. In 8th place, we have Shield plus 1. I think we can all agree that no matter how many health buff gives you, one more shield is still way better, because shields are regeneratable, or I don't know. And in the end, you'll find that you can tank way more damage with one more shield than if you had 10 more health. This ability has one downside. It sometimes messes up blue shields and can become useless in very rare occasions. For example, if you have 3 shield, and by choosing this buff, you become a 4 base shield. And if you can't tank a 4 damage bullet with blue shield, you'd technically be trading for a worse steal. But you know, this ability is useless in some situations, but incredibly good in others. And the incredibly good portion of the occasions is much higher. So nice. Just choose it. It's really good. This buff helps health regenerate, and it is much more reliable in the long run than potion crates. The one thing that it fails at is reliability. This buff cannot provide the most crucial kind of healing when you're about to die, and that's why most people doesn't like it at all, but I think you can look past that flaw. This buff is still great. The reason that I didn't put this side by side with potion crate comes from how good it is in badass mode, because in badass mode there are so many more enemies that you can heal off of, and the box amount remains unchanged. So you know, there are a lot more opportunities for you to heal with vampirism instead of healing with boxed potions, and I think that is really important. Plus, if you can just never lose health or like have your health to a critical level, it doesn't matter if you can't provide the most crucial amount of healing. So you know, it's pretty good. In 6th place, we have Fire Shield, one of the kings of the last rankings. This buff used to be top 3, like Jesus, because of explosions and fire ticks being completely fucking lethal. Like, that stuff is not fun to deal with. But after bombs got nerfed in game, this ability falls behind a Poison Shield for providing less damage prevention. Still, burst damage is more dangerous than damage over time, but after the fire ticks got turned into one tick, it really became hard to recommend this buff. But if you have fire weapons, this guy is still pretty nice. One other thing that I want to say is, if you are looking to complete badass mode or just complete the game in general, choosing defensive buffs is overall much better than choosing offensive buffs, because you can have more survivability. If you just chicken around the corner and can survive for longer, you don't need more damage. But in my opinion, having more damage, it is so much more fun than having, like, for example, immunity to fire. But I do have to take practicality into consideration, since, you know, you're trying to beat the game, and I think going for defensive buffs is genuinely more practical than going for offensive buffs. Poison Shield is sort of the polar opposite of Fire Shield, but not really, because they're all shields. Providing protection against slower poison, because purple poison areas are untouched in balance updates, this makes poison more dangerous than fire and bombs, making Poison Shield better than Fire Shield. It's so simple. It has the same reasons why it's good with Fire Shield, but it's just a little bit better because it prevents even more damage. Let's pick. And, you know, mandrakes, whatever that thing is called, is not rare, and you can always have Fire Shield and Poison Shield as a passive buff in Badass runs if you got plants. So these buffs are really good, but you know, if you have plants, you'd have to choose them in game. So nice. This will probably be my second most controversial pick in this tier list. Accuracy buff. Accuracy buff is hands down my favorite buff. It feels so good to have your shots shoot in a straight line and crit a whole lot more. This buff provides a better threat coverage for your shots, more damage for shotguns and single enemies, and makes critting feel so much easier. Accu buffs makes weapons feel like butter to play, and it is great. Many people dislike it, and I can see why. On the surface, this buff is just like bundling the spread, but it does so much more than that. Still, due to community feedback, I decided to put it not at the top of S plus tier, but at the top of S tier, which means it's still good, but you know, it's more decent. This ability, without a doubt, is the ability that jumped up in the rankings the most. After using Purple Hand for an extensive while, I changed. The slower bullets are super noticeable. It gives you much more time to react and dodge, making this better choice over any speed ability, such as crit speed. The pickup radius thing is much more of a bonus, though collecting mana can be nice if bosses is guarding the pile. Super good buff, but it still cannot reach the level of amazingness the next two buffs can reach. That is simply because the next two buffs are so defensive and so practical that this buff just he just loses his shine. In second place, we've got one of the newer buffs released, Coin Shield. Fucking hell, it's awesome. This ability is an upgrade of the already great Shield +1, and turns it into an overall Shield +2, but it's a Shield +3 and badass mode kind of thing. Shield outclasses health in every way, and as someone who doesn't spend coins unless it's really important, this thing is just a health buff for your shield, and it is completely nuts. The only occasion where I can see this buff being not very good as if you're a super spendy on coins. Otherwise, this is surely one of the most OP buffs in the game. Having 3 more shield means you can tank 1 to 2 more shots, and those shields are regeneratable. I don't know what I'm talking, but it is so incredibly good, and I think this buff is such a go-to, but it is not number 1. And I'm sure you can all guess what number 1 is. We've all seen it coming. The Survivability King is still undefeated. Being able to take any shot with a sliver of shield is crazy. This is the most crucial buff for Origins, Loop Mode, Boss Rush, and Badass. It can help save a lot of clumsy mistakes that can and will lead up to death, and this makes some shield regen abilities completely broken. Best buff in the game is still Blue Shield. I don't think that anybody can disagree. Saving your precious health in any situation is just amazing, you know? If you're that kind of person who just like retreats back when your shield is low, this will prevent basically any damage on your health, and that is incredible. Another 30-minute video, ain't it? The reason why it took me 7 straight months to edit this video is because I started this project, 7 months ago, and, it's a big project, and, I've been preparing for it. And then I got demotivated, and whenever I'd open up my editing software, I'd just see this 30-minute video waiting to be finished, and I just feel like I was gonna die. So I didn't feel like editing it for 7 straight months. Of course, I'm not that unproductive. I finished this video in about 2 months after the 7-month period, so, you already seen that coming. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to smash that like button or subscribe to the channel. And I've been seeing massive growth on the channel, and I deeply appreciate it. Thank you so much for, you know, the past support over these past 7 months, which there were a comment every single day that I didn't feel like responding to because I was so demotivated. And you know, my subscriber number just kept growing, and we're already past 1,000, and I'm sitting at like 1,300 right now, which is super amazing. And you know, thank you again. Alright, this is the end of the video. Peace out.